They say what you envy in the light may be suffering in the dark, and not every house that stands tall is a home worth entering. This is the story of a woman who thought her wealth was a fortress, but never realized it was a cage of her own making. This is the story of how a bully finally met the one person who could not be bought, bullied, or broken. Madam Agnes was known in the neighborhood of Ogba as a woman of iron and ice. In the marketplace, she moved like a queen among commoners. Her wrappers were always the finest Hollandaise, stiff with starch and smelling of expensive lavender. Her head ties reached toward the heavens, sharp enough to cut the clouds. When she walked into the local church, the ushers scrambled to find her the front row seat, for her tithes were the loudest and her offerings were the heaviest. To the world, she was the definition of a strong, independent woman. People would point as she drove her vintage Mercedes through the dusty streets. "Look at Madam Agnes," they would whisper. "A woman of substance. A woman who owns half the street." But the tenants of number 14 knew a different woman. Behind the high walls of the compound, topped with jagged glass and coiled barbed wire, Agnes's laughter turned into a serrated blade. She did not walk, she patrolled. She did not speak. She commanded. To live under her roof was to live in a state of permanent atmospheric pressure. Agnes believed that because she owned the bricks, she owned the breath of those within them. It did not take much to trigger her thunder. A child's bicycle left in the hallway. A tenant's guest staying 5 minutes past the visitor's curfew. A plea for a 2-day extension on the exorbitant security fee she invented every Christmas. Is this a marketplace? She would roar from her balcony, her voice shaking the window panes of the rooms below. "I am the lioness of this compound. If you want to live like animals, go to the bush. If you want to live in my house, you pay with your money and your silence." Kemi, a young tailor who occupied room 3, learned quickly that stillness was the only survival. She would stitch her cloths in the dark because Agnes complained that the hum of the sewing machine vibrated her floorboards. She learned to walk on her tiptoes, praying the floor wouldn't creak, praying the morning would come without a confrontation. But even silence did not always save them. The nights were the worst. Agnes would often pace her balcony at midnight, shining a high-powered flashlight into the windows of the rooms below, checking to see whose television was still on, or who was whispering too loudly. She fed on their fear. She grew taller every time a man twice her age bowed his head and called her mommy just to avoid being thrown into the street. Then, one Harmattan morning, the taxi arrived. The taxi was old and battered, its muffler coughing out grey smoke, a stark contrast to the gleaming Mercedes in the driveway. From it stepped Sarah. She was not what the tenant expected. She was not a big woman with loud jewelry. She was slender, dressed in a simple cotton gown, her hair braided back without ornament. She carried one large trunk and a briefcase. Madam Agnes watched from her balcony, her eyes narrowing. She had rented the back room, the smallest, dampest room in the yard. To this woman over the phone, sight unseen, because Sarah had paid a year's rent in advance without asking for a discount. To Agnes, this was a sign of a soft target. A woman with money but no backbone. "You!" Agnes shouted as Sarah reached for her trunk. "Don't drag that box on my tiles. Lift it. I didn't spend thousands on flooring for you to scar it with your cheap luggage." Sarah paused. She did not flinch. She did not look up immediately. She slowly lifted the trunk, turned her head, and looked Agnes directly in the eyes. It wasn't a look of defiance, it was a look of clinical curiosity. It was the way a scientist looks at a specimen under a microscope. "Understood," Sarah said. Her voice was low, melodic, and entirely devoid of fear. The other tenants, watching from the shadows of their doorways, felt a collective shiver. They had seen many move in with hope, only to have it crushed within a week. They expected Sarah to be no different. For the first month, Sarah was a ghost. She left at 7 a.m. and returned at 6 p.m. She never joined the communal gossip at the drying lines. She never complained about the lack of water. She simply observed. But Agnes was unsettled. She hated things she couldn't categorize. She hated the way Sarah didn't scramble to greet her. Agnes began to invent rules specifically to break Sarah's composure. She banned all deliveries to the back room. She claimed Sarah was walking too loudly in the evening. She even accused Sarah of using too much of the communal borehole water. One Saturday, Agnes decided to bring the hammer down. She walked to Sarah's door and banged on it with her heavy brass keys. "Open up. I need to inspect the plumbing," Agnes shouted. It was a lie, she just wanted to see what Sarah was hiding in her room. Sarah opened the door. The room was sparse. A bed, a small desk, and stacks of neatly organized folders. On the desk sat a laptop and a high-end digital camera. "Why do you have all these papers?" Agnes asked, pushing her way inside. "Are you a secret journalist?" "I don't allow spies in my house." "I am a researcher, Madam Agnes," Sarah said, standing by the door. "I study systems. How they work, and why they fail." Agnes scoffed, picking up a folder. "Systems. The only system here is mine. I am the law. I am the judge. If I see one word about me in a newspaper, you will be in the gutter before the ink dries." Sarah smiled. It was the first time anyone had seen her smile. "I don't write for newspapers, madam. I write for archives. The truth doesn't need a headline to be heavy." The heat of the dry season brought out the worst in Agnes. The borehole began to run low, and rather than fixing the pump, Agnes decided to monetize the scarcity. She locked the taps and announced that water would now cost 50 naira per bucket, paid directly to her. Mama Joy, the oldest tenant, was a woman of 70 who sold roasted corn by the roadside. Her legs were swollen, and her heart was tired. One afternoon, she collapsed near the lock tap, her empty bucket clattering against the ground. The tenants rushed to help her, but Agnes appeared on the balcony, screaming, "Don't touch that tap. If she can't pay, she can't drink. This is not a hospital. Move her away from my gate." The crowd hesitated, paralyzed by the habit of obedience. Then, Sarah stepped forward. She didn't look at Agnes. She knelt beside Mama Joy, produced a bottle of cold water from her bag, and pressed it to the old woman's lips. Then, she pulled a small pair of bolt cutters from her pocket. The sound of the lock snapping was like a gunshot in the quiet yard. Agnes turned a shade of purple that looked like a bruise. You have destroyed my property. You are a thief. I will call the police. You are finished in this city." Sarah stood up, helping Mama Joy to her feet. She looked up at the balcony. "The law states that access to water is a fundamental right, and an illegal surcharge on a utility you do not provide is a felony, Agnes. I haven't destroyed your property. I've liberated it." That night, the electricity to Sarah's room was cut. Then the water. Then the lock on the front gate was changed, locking Sarah out in the street at midnight. But Sarah didn't bang on the gate. She didn't scream. She sat in her car, the glow of her laptop illuminating her face. She was typing. She was uploading. She was finishing the research she had started months ago. The following Monday was meant to be Agnes's day of triumph. She had hired 2 area boys, muscular men with scarred faces, to throw Sarah's belongings into the mud. She wanted a spectacle. She wanted the other tenants to see what happens when the still water tries to rise against the mountain. "Throw it all out," Agnes commanded, pointing at Sarah's door. "Break the bed. Burn the papers. Let the wind carry her rubbish away." As the men approached the door, the groaning iron gate of the compound swung open. This time, it wasn't a coffin taxi. 4 white SUVs with government seals pulled into the yard. Behind them, 2 police Hilux vans. Madam Agnes strutted forward, her hand on her hip. "Oh, officers. You are early. I called you to arrest this quarter, but you brought the whole division. Good. See the woman in the back room, she is a criminal." A man in a sharp grey suit stepped out of the lead SUV. He wasn't looking at Agnes. He was looking at Sarah, who had just walked out of her room, dressed not in a cotton gown, but in a formal navy blue suit with a badge pinned to her lapel. "Director Sarah," the man said, bowing slightly. "The warrants are signed. The forensic audit of the bank accounts is complete. We found the offshore holdings and the undeclared properties." Agnes's voice faltered. "Director. What is this joke? Sarah is a tenant. She lives in the small room. She is a nobody." Sarah walked toward Agnes, her footsteps steady on the tiles. "I moved into the small room because I wanted to see the truth from the bottom up, Agnes. I wanted to see how you treated the people who couldn't fight back. Because when we take you to court, it won't just be for tax evasion and money laundering. It will be for the human rights violations you committed behind these walls." The officers moved in. They didn't go for Sarah. They went for Agnes. "Get your hands off me." Agnes shrieked, her head tie falling lopsided. "Do you know who I am? I am a friend of the commissioner. I have donated to the governor's campaign." "The commissioner has already distanced himself," the man in the suit said coldly. "And the governor doesn't take calls from people whose assets have been frozen by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission." As the handcuffs clicked shut, the compound fell into a silence so profound you could hear the Hammertown wind whistling through the barbed wire. The lioness was being led away, her expensive wrapper dragging in the dirt, her voice reduced to a desperate whimper. Sarah turned to the tenants. "To Kemi, to Mr. Okon, to Mama Joy. This house is now under state receivership," Sarah announced. "You don't owe any back rent. You don't owe any fees. You will be given new contracts that are fair and legal. The gate will stay open." Mama Joy hobbled forward and took Sarah's hand. "We thought you were just another victim," she whispered. Sarah squeezed her hand. "The predator always thinks the prey is weak. That is their greatest mistake. ## the lessons of the dust." In the weeks that followed, the story of the evil landlady became a legend in Ogba. It was a tale told at the stream, in the marketplace, and under the shade of the baobab trees. Agnes's Mercedes was towed away. Her house was repainted. The high walls with the jagged glass were lowered, and the barbed wire was replaced with flowering vines. Ngozi sat with Kemi at the entrance of the compound, watching the children play in the yard, something that was once a forbidden crime. "They say Agnes is crying in her cell every night," Ngozi said. "She says the other inmates are treating her like she treated us. Do you feel bad for her, Kemi? After all, she is an old woman now." Kemi looked at her sewing machine, which now hummed loudly and proudly by the window. She thought of the years of silence. She thought of the darkness and the fear. She smiled, a smile of deep, quiet understanding. "I do not feel bad for her," Kemi said. "She did not lose her house. She only lost the power to make others feel homeless while they were under their own roof. She took our peace for years, now, she is finally paying the rent." The wind carried her words through the open gate, out into the street where the sun was shining. The warning was clear to all who would listen. Not everything that shines is gold, ****. Not every smile is happiness, ****. And no matter how high you build your walls, the truth always knows how to climb, ****. Was the story interesting? Please kindly share your thoughts in the comment section. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting stories with life lessons. See you on our next video. Thanks, family of Clinzzy Folktales, ****.